Let's bring in Albert Breer, Monday morning quarterback, joining us on the program. And I just saw where Albert Breer is reporting that the Bears will entertain trade offers for quarterback Nick Foles. Albert joins us now. What do you think about that? Where do you think Nick Foles could end up?
Well, I think it's just sort of hard because of the money, but he's been a really good soldier for them. And so I think they're going to kind of follow his lead here. I do think at one point the Jets had some interest in bringing him in. And obviously Joe Douglas, the general manager in New York, was in Philadelphia with Foles, understands what Foles could mean for a young quarterback. So I think there was some level of interest there. I don't know how much interest Foles would have in going to New York right now. And I don't think the Bears are going to put Foles in a situation he doesn't want to be in. I think out of loyalty and because, again, Foles has been a good soldier in dealing with the drafting of Justin Fields and dealing with the signing of Andy Dalton and not getting very many reps in the spring and in camp. I think they're going to they're maybe not follow his lead, but at least seek sign off on whatever happens. So it's going to take somebody wanting to pick up the contract, number one, and then number two, I don't think the Bears are going to do it unless it's something that Foles wants to do.
What about Dallas for Nick Foles?
It makes some sense. I mean, Garrett Gilbert, I think, would be the number two there right now. And yeah, I mean, there's nobody that knows better than the Cowboys what can happen to your season if you lose your quarterback. And you look at obviously 2015 when Tony Romo got hurt and they had a really, really loaded roster. The whole thing fell apart. And then, of course, what happened last year. I think the Cowboys would be one team that you would look at and say could have an interest. If the money works out, could have an interest. And, of course, Nick Foles being from Texas, there is a connection there.
I know that Jerry Jones came out recently. He was, very effusive talking about Tony Romo, in his mind, first ballot Hall of Famer. And I know a lot of people laughed at that and said, no, his numbers don't compare. Is Tony Romo, should he be under consideration for the Hall of Fame? Maybe not a Hall of Famer, but under consideration.
You remember like a few years ago when we had to raise the bar for receivers because the numbers had gotten so out of whack, right? Yeah. And so you had like numbers that were benchmarks for Hall of Famers, and now guys who hit those benchmarks aren't getting in because the statistics have changed. I sort of think something similar is happening with quarterbacks now where, how do you separate Drew Brees from Phillip Rivers, from Tony Romo, from Eli Manning? People say Eli Manning's a shoo-in. Is he though? And where do we draw the line? I think, over the next 5 to 10 years, Hall of Fame voters are going to have some tough decisions to make on some guys who, had they been up for, induction 10, 15, 20 years ago, might have gotten in. And I think part of it is that we're in a golden age for the position. You see a lot fewer teams, Dan, just rolling out there into an NFL season without an answer at quarterback. And we used to see that all the time. You feel like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you'd see teams that would go into a season and the position would be a dumpster fire. And you knew they were taking one in the top 5 the next year. And you just don't see that anymore. And I just think that's been the natural evolution of the position. That also means at the high end, we've got a lot of really good quarterbacks. The Rams moved off a quarterback they went to the Super Bowl with. The Niners are in the process of moving off a quarterback they went to the Super Bowl with. So I just think the bar is raising at the position in general. And I think that's going to have an effect on the way the Hall of Fame thing goes down too. And so, it's not just Romo in a vacuum. It's also Romo versus Rivers, Romo versus Roethlisberger, Romo versus Eli.
Also the running back position. I don't know what is going to be considered a Hall of Fame caliber. Used to be you got to 10,000 yards and you punched your ticket to the Hall of Fame. That was a long time ago. I don't know what 10,000 yards means now for is Derrick Henry going to be a Hall of Famer if he gets to 10,000 yards?
Yeah, and the shelf life. Do we have guys who are going to make it as far as Emmitt Smith made it? Now, Adrian Peterson, I think, is an obvious one. I think he goes in, and I think that's a pretty easy call. Marshawn Lynch, is he in? If you look at his career numbers in the aggregate, maybe not, but his impact in the game was huge, right? He was the centerpiece for a Super Bowl champion on offense. So
Frank Gore,
I think,
Frank Gore.
Frank Gore is a great one. Frank Gore, I think his critics would say he's a compiler, but you look at his story and coming into the league with 2 surgically repaired knees and making it as long as he did, and having the impact on so many people around him, being the centerpiece again of a team that made it to the Super Bowl in San Francisco. I think it's interesting. And I also think the way we look at the position is going to probably start to evolve and change too. I mean, you bring up Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry's sort of what the position used to be. You know, look at Zeke Elliott, look at Saquon Barkley, look at Alvin Kamara. All those guys can bring value in the passing game. And so I think that position is changing and evolving too. Here's the other thing, Dan. I mean, I feel like when you and I grew up, the best athlete on the team more often than not was the tailback. I don't think that's the case anymore. You know, I think more often than not, that sort of athlete's probably going and playing receiver now. Like, would Odell Beckham have been a running back? You know, if he had come along 25 years earlier, maybe he would have been Marshall Faulk, you know? So I think that that's part of the evolution as well.
He's Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter, lead content strategist for the Monday Morning Quarterback. Why all of a sudden Deshaun Watson could get traded, might get traded? Here's what they would trade for him. Now it's on the front burner. What's happening?
Because the cut down to 53 is on Tuesday. And so the question now becomes, are the Texans willing to pay him $10.45 million for the year, because that's what it would cost to carry him on the roster for the year? And B, are they willing to go with, in essence, 52 players if they're not going to play him? Because if you're not going to play him, that means somebody else is losing their job over this. And I just would tell you, and like, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen over the next 48 hours. I do agree that this creates a pressure point for the Texans to some degree. I just, my sense throughout has been that Nick Caserio is not taking 50 cents on the dollar for Deshaun Watson. And I agree with him on this. 25-year-old franchise quarterback who's got 5 years left on his contract. There's no more priceless commodity in football than that. And because you can't get full value for him right now, what's the harm in waiting? If you have him under contract for the next 5 years, what's the harm in waiting if you feel like maybe 3 months from now, 6 months from now, you might be able to get 3 or 4 first-round picks? Is it better to wait and ride it out because you've already ridden it out with a new head coach for 6 weeks in training camp? Or are you better off taking a lot less now and continuing your rebuild without Watson and without the haul you might have been able to get? Unless somebody's going to come in and offer something, the sort of thing that the Texans would have been able to get in January and February and March before the 22 lawsuits were filed. I just think Nick Caserio, as the new general manager of the Texans, has resolved not to move it. Maybe you've got something for me, but unless somebody's going to give him the value that you would normally get for a quarterback of Deshaun Watson's stature, absent everything else that's going on, which is way more serious than football, what would create the rush to get something done right now?
Yeah, and from what I'm told, though, one team wants contingency plans for those draft picks, and it's like, hey, you know what? We'll give the first-round picks, but if he doesn't play or he gets indicted or whatever it might be, then those number ones become maybe number twos. That some kind of language in there.
So consider this, though, Dan. So let's say there's the language in there, and I think the Texans are leery about putting conditions on this. So let's say one of the conditions is he has to play 8 games this year. Okay. So let's say there's an 8-game suspension, and which I think is reasonable. If you look at what Roethlisberger got in 2010, it was 6 games that got knocked down to 4. So let's say he gets an 8-game suspension, and then, he gets hurt. So now he doesn't hit that 8 games, right? And that takes away a first-round pick. Would you want to put yourself in that situation when maybe it doesn't even relate directly to innocence or guilt here? It's just sort of the way the league sees the situation. Or would you rather wait for clarity so you could get 3 first-round picks, without any conditions on them? The Texans, I mean, if you gave Nick Caserio and David Culley truth serum, they know they're not winning the Super Bowl this year. So is it really that important that they have the picks right now rather than in March? And by the way, they can't execute any of those picks until April anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you're the Texans here, absent everything else, I just think you have to look at this and say to yourself, if we're going to walk away from Deshaun Watson, which again, they didn't want to do in January and February and March before the temperature turned up on everything. If you're going to walk away from that, you have to get full value. And if you don't get full value as a first-year GM and a first-year coach, for the rest of the time in Houston, you're going to be chasing that back, right? That's going to be the hill you're going to have to get over. And so I think, the Texans, you can blame them for a lot of stuff that they've done in the last year. That place has been a mess. But I think the Texans are taking the right approach here and waiting to find a way to get full value. And maybe somebody moves over the next couple of days and gives it to them. But I don't think Nick Caserio is going to be pressured into doing something short-sighted based on, a deadline coming up in the next, I guess, 36 hours now.
I mentioned that I thought Cam Newton was going to be the starter. I still stand by that, even though Mac Jones has played probably a lot better than people thought at this, lack of experience. Cam was only playing 2 series in this last game, and usually that's what happens when you're the starter. Although Belichick left it open, though, when he didn't want to name a starter. Is that some kind of, hey, I got some coy moves here, I don't want to, tell somebody who our starter is?
There's part of me that says, because I've seen these situations before, and there's part of me that wonders, is he really thinking about it? Because Mac has played really well. That said, you have to think about, I think in these situations, you always have to think about the other 10 guys in the huddle, right? And take what happened in San Francisco. And, I talked to Kyle Shanahan about this about 3 weeks ago, and he brought up to me the idea of doing a quarterback shuttle, right? Like moving guys in and out. And I know people went crazy over what happened yesterday. But the truth is, if you're Kyle Shanahan and you're really thinking about doing that, well, you got to get not just those guys ready for it. You got to get the other 10 guys in the huddle ready for that too, and ready to go back and forth, right? And so I think the same sort of principle applies when you're really trying to analyze what's happening with Cam and Mac. If you were really thinking about starting Mac Jones, wouldn't it behoove you to at least have gotten him a few series with the starters in the preseason just to see what it looks like, just so the offensive lineman can hear his voice, just so the receivers can kind of hear how he adjusts things and the things that he's capable of doing on the fly? In my mind, and Belichick's a very, very logical person. Logically, wouldn't it create more value for you to get Mac Jones that experience and get the other 10 guys that experience with Mac Jones than it would to create some sort of mystery over who you're starting? I would think so, right?
Who's starting?
I think it's Cam, and I think Mac's going to start games this year. And I think Mac is going to, I think it could happen quick too. I'm not saying it's as quick as it happened last year with, say, Justin Herbert and Tyrod Taylor. And obviously that's a different situation, but we've seen this before, and they're since 2008, which is really the paradigm shift here. Since 2008, when Matt Ryan and Joe Flacco were rookies, there've only been 3 true red shirts among all the quarterbacks that have gone in the first round. And those 3 were Jordan Love, Patrick Mahomes, and Jake Locker. All 3 of those quarterbacks played for contenders. That's what's so interesting about the 3 quarterback situations in Chicago, San Francisco, and New England. Generally, first-round quarterbacks go to bad teams. These guys aren't going to bad teams. These guys are going to teams that have contended recently. So I would say Mac's going to be ready to play either, end of September, beginning of October, somewhere in there. I think they'd feel comfortable putting him in there. I think the question is going to be, how good are they? And do they have the window to put him in? Because if Cam's playing relatively well and they're 3-0, 4-1, 6-2, do you have the opening to do that? I think it becomes a little bit more complicated. And, to me, that's what's so fascinating about the situation the Patriots are facing. And I think it's sort of similar to what you're going to see in San Francisco and Chicago too, if those teams are able to get off to the sorts of starts they think they're capable of.
Also, Philadelphia trades for Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew, in his mind, was competing with Trevor Lawrence, even though he wasn't going to win that job. He's not going to Philadelphia to be Jalen Hurts' backup. How does this? What's the message being sent here?
I think it's the Eagles. I think, first of all, it's the Eagles are always carried 3 quarterbacks. I also think this is just sort of Howie Roseman's thing. And it goes back to Andy Reid. We need to give ourselves as many throws at that dartboard as we possibly can to try and get the quarterback position right. And so I think they bring in Gardner Minshew and they see baseline for the next 2 years, we have a very affordable backup. And some teams are paying $5, $6, $7 million a year for a backup. We've got Gardner Minshew for under $1 million this year, under $1 million next year. So that's the baseline. And if it becomes more, great. And if Jalen Hurts struggles and Gardner Minshew proves to be a great fit for Nick Sirianni, awesome. And for all of that, we're only out a 6th-round pick, and it's a 5th-round pick if he plays. So I just think more than anything else, Dan, it's like looking at it as sort of a risk reward thing. There's almost no risk. And baseline reward is you get a good backup at a really cheap rate, a guy who has started, I believe, 20 games as a pro already. And maybe it grows into being something more. I'll also tell you this. I mean, having talked to Urban Meyer about it over the last couple of weeks, he loved Gardner Minshew as a player. Obviously, Gardner wanted a fresh start somewhere else, but part of the reason why the quarterback quote unquote competition, because I don't think it was really a competition either. Part of the reason why the Urban had to drag it out for as long as he had to drag it out is the guys in the locker room really respected Gardner and saw like the Gardner was actually pushing Trevor in a lot of different ways.
Always great to catch up with you. I don't know what you're going to do for the next week with all you got cut down like a week and a half that
I'll
games.
find a way to keep myself busy over the next few days.
Albert,
Definitely.
Thank you, buddy.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
That's Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter, lead content strategist for the Monday Morning Quarterback.